Welcome to the second hour of Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor. Well, I'm really pleased to have with me for the first time today Marin Katusa. Marin is a former mathematics professor and an accomplished investment analyst. He is KC Research's Chief Energy Investment Strategist. He wears the hat of Managing Editor for KC Energy Confidential, it's KC Energy Report, and the Colder War Letter. What really caused me to reach out to Marin to get him on the show today is a book that he just completed. It's titled The Colder War, How the Global Energy Trade Slipped from America's Grasp. I believe this is really a very timely topic for sure, given what's going on in the Ukraine and geopolitically. We talked to Daniel McAdams of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity and David Jensen frequently about these topics. And this book is really a very interesting, very easy to read book, but it's really filled with a lot of very important facts, I think, that are relevant to how we plan our lives. So really pleased to have you with me today, Marin. Thank you for joining me.
It's my pleasure.
Just to make sure that I don't forget, before we get started with this very timely, important topic, tell our listeners where they can follow your work and how they can pick up a copy of your book.
Sure, thanks, Jay. Well, if you go to kcresearch.com, every Tuesday I write my weekly missive on my thoughts on the geopolitics of energy or specific energy hot items. Also, if you want to subscribe, you get a 90-day free trial to the KC Energy Report. The book is available online right now at Amazon or Barnes & Nobles or Chapters, Walmart, and most bookstores across North America. The physical copies will be available November 10th.
Good. Excellent. Well, I'm very pleased to have a copy. Thanks for sending one along to me. And The Colder War, How the Global Energy Trade Slipped from America's Grasp. Very, very interesting book. With the rise in tensions with Russia, and especially since the conflict in the Ukraine, we are hearing more and more talk these days of a second Cold War, but your book is titled The Colder War. Does that mean that this one will be even more perilous than the last one that ended during the Reagan administration?
Well, definitely. First let's take a look back at, the Americans claimed themselves victors of the Cold War, and you saw their foreign geopolicy really change. Look what they did in Kosovo. Look, for example, what they tried to attempt to do in Syria. And, over the last decade, you've seen Putin really gain control domestically of Russia's politics. Mm-hmm. So, Russia under Putin's leadership was able to reestablish itself as a global superpower. Now, the difference between this Colder War and the last Colder War is the emerging markets like China. They did not play a significant role. Well, they will in this Colder War. And Putin has aligned himself up with nations such as China to work in concert against the interests of America globally. And that really is the crux of what is going on in the Colder War.
Oh. Could you give our listeners a little background on Vladimir Putin? A little bit of his story is a very interesting story, and his family and how they endured some very difficult times in the past. Could you give our listeners a little color on his background?
Sure. So Vladimir Putin was born in St. Petersburg. His grandfather was actually one of the most famous cooks in all of Russia, and he was the personal chef for Lenin. And when Lenin passed away, Stalin chose him. He handpicked Putin's grandfather to be his personal cook. So think about all of the guys who've died being close to Stalin. Well, Putin's grandfather was one of the only few ones who actually outlived Stalin. So he outlived Lenin and Stalin. So this guy was a survivor. So when Putin was growing up, his grandfather would share all of his stories with him, and so from an early age, Putin dreamed of being a KGB Secret Service agent. Well, as it would be, he went to law school, and he was such a strong speaker in German that he could pass as a German. So they set him up in East Germany, and within a few years, the one key fact is that Putin is such an ambitious individual that he succeeds at what he applies, and within a few years, he became the head of the KGB in East Germany.
Wow.
So when the fall of the USSR happened, he went back to St. Petersburg, went to complete his PhD, and then he worked under an individual named Sobchak. So he was the mayor of St. Petersburg, and he was really the mentor of Putin throughout the early stages of the St. Petersburg. So Putin became his campaign manager.
Wow.
And what's interesting is the guys who are all around him today, like if you look at the prime minister who was president when Putin stepped away for 4 years, Medvedev, he worked under Putin in St. Petersburg. And Putin got everyone who was working with him to sign an oath that if Sobchak loses the mayor, the campaign, that they will all not go and work for the competitor.
Okay.
And then Sobchak actually lost, but the competitor was so impressed by Putin, he asked him to come work and be his number two, and Putin said, no, I am loyal to my guys. And all of Putin's inner circle refused the offer. Putin goes to Moscow, quickly works his way up to the head of the FSB, which is the old KGB, and when Yeltsin was at his absolute low in mid-1999, handpicks him to become prime minister. Now, no one in the mainstream ever heard of who Vladimir Putin was. So Putin recognized that the last 5 prime ministers all were kicked out within 6 years. It was unprecedented in Russian history. And he realized that he had to do something significant. So what did he do? The Second Chechen War. But this time it wasn't done from Moscow with the political talking heads. He actually went there with the military and oversaw everything, and it was a vast victory. Overnight, he became a sensation, and on New Year's Eve of 1999, Yeltsin was under significant pressure. He resigned, and Vladimir Putin went from prime minister to president on New Year's Eve 1999. Now, no one expected him to win the election, but in March, he won the election in 2000. And his first thing of duty was to go after the oligarchs. So we all know what he did with Khodorkovsky, but there was many oligarchs. And he basically said, look, I will let you keep your money. However, if you keep meddling in politics, I will take you down. And some of the guys, like Abramovich, said, okay, we're on side. Other guys like Khodorkovsky, the temptation was too much. He wanted to overthrow Putin. Well, we know how that ended up. He spent 10 years in jail. So that is kind of the crux of how Putin consolidated power within Russia. And look, he's going to be in power for another 6 years because he's done 2 terms as president. Then he did a term, 4 years as prime minister, and now he's going to be doing his terms, which are 6 years now. They extended it from 4 to 6 years. So you're looking at a minimum, as long as he's alive, he's going to be running Russia. But more importantly is he's put in his inner circle, Medvedev, Igor Sechin, all these individuals that even if Putin, let's say, dies or retires or whatever, the policies that he's put in place is going to be put forward and pushed forward and executed regardless of who's in power, because it's his inner circle who will take his place.
No, and that loyalty issue, I guess, probably comes into play with that group as well, just as Putin was loyal to the people he promised to be loyal to. I guess that's pretty important, I would think.
Well, definitely. And, you have to ask yourself this question. Look at Barack Obama. Does he have the loyal inner circle that Putin has? Definitely not. His inner circle are backstabbing him now. They're saying what a ridiculous fool he is. They're coming out now. And the difference between the American politics and where Russia is at currently is Obama's been planning on, quarterly cycles. Every 3 months is an agenda. Well, the Russians are planning in decade cycles.
To what extent do you think Putin has global aspirations, or to what extent is he just really solidifying, strengthening Russia and being concerned about potential enemies on his border?
Well, that's the key. You nailed it right on the head there, Jay, at the end. When the USSR failed, the one thing that Russia and Vladimir Putin have stated that they will protect the interests of all Russians in the former USSR states. So you look at what's going on in Ukraine. What the West is really misunderstanding is there's a lot of Russian-speaking Russians in Ukraine. And that's what Putin's trying to, take care of their interests. Another important area is look at Kazakhstan. 40% of the world's primary uranium production is in Kazakhstan. I could see some issues happening there because Nazarbayev, who's the leader, who's been for 45 years, the leader of Kazakhstan, he's an older fella now. There's rumors that he's ill. If there's a power vacuum there, Putin will do whatever he can to secure and stabilize it, what I call the satellite states, because the last thing he needs is more chaos amongst his borders.
Mm-hmm. The Russian economy, of course, is so much focused on energy, and this is, of course, one of the reasons energy is your forte. It's an area of strength, so it's not unnatural, I guess, for you to really hone in on this issue of energy. And Russia is really, seemingly, from what I understand in your book, and I wasn't really aware of it, not only are they developing their oil and gas industry internally within Russia, but apparently Russia has now moved on to some African countries and elsewhere around the world. Is that right?
Well, definitely, not just Africa. Look what's going on in Asia. Look what's going on in the Middle East, for example. A lot of people don't realize that the Russians are making huge investments in the Middle East. So definitely, and one thing that your readers, your listeners need to know is Russia's been the number 1 or 2 oil producer for the last 100 years.
Mm.
And it's not just oil and natural gas. What about uranium? They control almost half of the world's uranium resources and about half of the upgrading facilities, the enrichment facilities for uranium. So if you want to understand energy, you need to understand Russia.
Yeah. Well, speaking of uranium, the United States, correct me if I'm wrong, but these are the sort of metrics that I have in my head, at least 3-4 years ago, that the United States generates something like a quarter of its electricity with nuclear energy, but it only maybe produces at most 10% of the uranium that is needed by its nuclear industry, and that it has relied to a great extent on Russia and the uranium that has come from the disassembled nuclear weapons after the fall of the USSR. So is this likely, this sort of rising tension that we're experiencing now between Russia and the United States, is that likely to hamper the flow of, or the source of that uranium into the United States in the future?
We bring up a great point. When we look at the baseload power of America, you're correct. It's about 20%. So one in every homes in America is powered by nuclear energy. But the startling fact, and like you pointed out, America is the largest consumer of uranium globally. But they import 90%, a little over 90% they import of what they consume. But the startling fact is 1 in every 10 homes in America is powered by Russian-controlled uranium.
Wow.
And, a lot of the Europeans are starting to get sick of all these sanctions because it's hurting Germany right now. And then they're asking, how is America getting hurt by these sanctions? Well, it wouldn't surprise me if the Americans try to, tighten the hatch on these sanctions, that perhaps Russia pulls the nuclear rug under Obama, and it would be the greatest blackout in American history if that was to happen.
What would we do then?
Well, the price of uranium, what you and I would do is we'd make a lot of money off the uranium sector. You would have an instant overnight pop of uranium. And you would see the spot price and the long-term price literally double overnight if such an issue happened. What the American utilities would have to do is really source and get hold of supplies. Now, the difference between, let's say, natural gas power plants and a uranium power plant is you try to build up a stockpile and have a long-term supply. So it would be a very big, difficult situation for the American utilities. And imagine this, if, for example, something happens in Kazakhstan and America really depends on Canada and Cameco for the Athabasca Basin, and projects like Cigar Lake, which are the most complicated mines in the world, where you're down 800 meters and you have to freeze the rock, and robots have to mine the uranium because it's so high grade. There's so many problems. There's so much high risk potential in these mining operations that if Obama wanted to play with America, he could really cause chaos in the electric grid.
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting possibility, I guess. But do you think Putin would do that? Think he'd pull the rug out?
Well, you see, Putin is a very level-headed guy. He doesn't react on emotion. What I do see him doing is, and he is doing this, if you look at the Russian nuclear industry, they're signing deals all around the world, including Iran. You're going to continue to see these deals in Asia, where the Russians are going to lend the money to build the nuclear power plant. They're going to build the nuclear power plant. They're going to operate the nuclear power plant. They're going to provide a 20-year feed, a stable, secure feed. And that's the most important thing for a nuclear utility of uranium. And then the most important thing is what do you do with the spent fuel? Well, the Russians have the infrastructure to handle all of that material. So it's going to be a full cycle, vertically integrated sector. And that's what the Russians are focusing on. And they have a great advantage over the Americans in that right now.
The United States, being the victors of World War II, of course, Russia was part of us, but we went our separate ways. And I'd like to look at the whole notion of, when we went off the gold standard in 1971, went on to a petrogold or a petrodollar standard, if you will, in the early 70s. And that has persisted, and that has really been an advantage to the United States. We've been able to print dollars almost an infinite amount, and obviously that may be coming to an end because the Russians and others, the Chinese and others, are very upset and concerned about the very unstable global monetary system that has been established to a large extent because of the abuse of this privilege of printing endless amounts of dollars. But it was based on a petrodollar system, and of course now the United States is trying to put sanctions on Russia and Iran and other countries that don't seem to be wanting to play along with our petrodollar system to the extent we would like. Do you see this coming to an end? Is this part of what's involved? Because Putin now, with his energy, tremendous amounts of energy production, is in a position to sort of unseat the United States and the petrodollar?
Well, Jay, this is such a critical, important element of the Colder War, which was different, again, from the Cold War. Mm-hmm. So, again, the West has such a Hollywood view of World War II. Let's go back. Yeah. This is a fact that if you add up all of the deaths that occurred in World War II of all the Allies, mm-hmm. Russians were significantly higher than that. It was the Russians who were battling the Germans on the Eastern Front. 1 in every 7 Russians died during World War II.
Wow.
It was a significant thing. Now, our Hollywood aspect of that is, it was the American military, and I'm not taking anything away from the American military. Look, the world together needed to join forces to fight the evil of the Nazis. But what I'm also saying is let's pay tribute to the facts. Mm-hmm. When the petrodollar was put in place, when Nixon sent Kissinger to Saudi Arabia, it was a very different place. If you look at Saudi Arabia today, it's got over 30% unemployment. All the oil wells, Bahar is all in the east Saudi Arabia, and the majority of the people there are Shiites. Mm-hmm. But the majority in Saudi Arabia are Sunnis, so there's a big battle that's going to brew there. The princes and the king of Saudi Arabia are very old. The youngest one now is 81. Mm-hmm. And you look at a decline of an empire, look at the Soviet Union. When it collapsed, its leaders were all old and they were dying off every couple of years. That's when Reagan said, how am I supposed to do anything with these guys when they're dying on me? Now, what the interesting thing is, you have 7,000 princes vying to take control of the kingdom.
Wow.
And, there's going to be a power struggle there. So when you look at what's going on globally, yes, deals are happening already outside of the petrodollar. For example, Iran and China. Iran is selling China oil not in U.S. dollars. So what will attack the petrodollar? Well, everything comes down to a supply and demand. If there's less demand for your dollar, guess what happens to your dollar? It weakens. So, they could have it still priced in relative terms to the dollar, but that's insignificant to the basis of it's not traded in U.S. dollars, or what we call the petrodollar. Mm-hmm. If you look at the largest deal ever in the world for energy, it was a $400 billion deal between China and Russia. Mm-hmm. I guarantee you, it is not being done in the U.S. dollars.
Sure.
So it's already started, and even the European nations have attacked the petrodollar. Look what Total did 2 months ago. They stated, even though the sanctions are there, we are moving forward with our Yamal LNG project, and Total had committed $27 billion to to build this LNG project with Novotech, a Russian firm. This is in Russia. And they said, because of the sanctions, we're not going to raise the money in U.S. dollars. We're going to raise it in yuan, in ruble, in euro, in yen, anything but the U.S. dollar. The interesting thing, Jay, that people need to really know, a month later, the president of the company died a mysterious death.
Oh, Total.
Yes, of Total. So Marjorie, the president, died. Now let's go back a bit. You know, when we look at Gaddafi, Gaddafi came out and said, let's go against the petrodollar. They have the gold, and we can trade oil in terms of the euro. Well, we all know how Gaddafi ended up. Let's go back a bit earlier. What about Saddam Hussein, who said, let's sell oil rather than U.S. dollars, let's sell it in non-U.S. dollars. France took him up on the offer, and France was buying oil from Iraq, from Saddam Hussein, and they were delivering food. It was called the Food for Oil program. We all know what happened right after Saddam Hussein did that deal. He fell, and the new regime never mentioned any alternative to the petrodollar. You look at Gaddafi, no alternative to the petrodollar. So it'll be interesting to see if the French now, under Total, have an alternative to the petrodollar. So the reality is that the importance of the petrodollar to the American way of life is more significant than anything else.
Yeah. So what has transpired since the death of the CEO of Total? I mean, have they scrapped the project?
No, they haven't scrapped the project yet, but there has been no announcement yet of Total how they're going to finance it, and it hasn't been the financing has not been closed yet. But at the same time, they have not stated that that they're going to be walking away from the project, because the reality is France needs this natural gas. It is such an important source. You know, all of Europe, whether they want to admit it or not, they cannot get away from the dependence of Russian oil and natural gas.
Well, which really raises the question then with regard to the Ukrainian conflict and the United States trying to put pressure on the Europeans to issue these sanctions. First of all, as you point out in your book, the Russians and the Iranians and others that we have that haven't been willing to play ball with the petrodollar, we treat them differently. We don't allow them to use our SWIFT system of banking. We try to sanction them in various ways, and they're finding ways around that. Though, talk to us a little bit about how the Iranians and the Russians and the Chinese, I guess maybe you've sort of started talking about that, but they're finding ways and even setting up their own banking system, I believe, or trying to, or working towards that end, so that we could, it seems to me, what could be developing, Marin, and tell me if I'm crazy, but it seems like we could be developing very much into a bipolar world in which sort of the BRIC countries are on one side and the Anglo-American empire countries are on the other. But then the question is, how solid will the Europeans be with the Anglo-Americans?
Well, you've just nailed it, and we jump into detail in this in the book, and it's already started, Jay. The IMF is really an American-controlled entity.
Sure it is.
And the reality is Putin was the one who really pushed the emerging markets to create something what is known as the BRIC Bank, which is going to be an alternative to the IMF. And through that, they're creating their own system of banking. So that's already started. But what people have to understand is you look at the euro, right, like the EU 28. It's a complete basket case. At least with the U.S. dollar, it's the American government that it's an IOU from. With the euro, who owes you? Is it France? Are you going to depend on, Greece? The problem with the euro is eventually the European Union is going to run out of German money. And that is the problem with the euro. And the German people are ready. I just got back from Germany. There's a lot of angst against the euro. They're thinking about voting to leave the euro. Angela Merkel has a lot of problems on her hand. And then the biggest element here is what nobody's talking about. The biggest black swan globally is the potential major issue in the South China Sea. If China and Japan start going at it, you already know that Japan's in the Anglo world, with America.
Yes.
Well, you know where Russia and South Africa and the emerging markets are going to be with. They're going to be with China. So there's a major issue that is brewing there that the Western media is not talking about at all. And the reality is that you look from a population standpoint, the emerging markets dominate the old world. And the reality is if we want to look out 50 to 100 years, Europe is just going to become one giant museum for the emerging markets, for the Chinese, for the Indians. That's the reality of what's going on. If you look at all of the prime real estate, I've had a large real estate development in Europe, in Croatia on the waterfront there. Mm-hmm. Guess what? Waterfront, all the beautiful homes beside me are being bought by not Germans, not Americans, Russians. So, it's already started and the reality is there.
Yeah, it's a changing world for sure. And it just seems to me, how far and how much we're going to push the Anglo-American world and the Western world, essentially, as pointed out in your book. And it was a very interesting quote on page, I think, 205. A speaker of Russia's upper house of parliament put it in a very colorful way. She said, "Some hot-headed decision makers have already forgotten that the global economic crisis of 2008, which is still taking its toll on the world, started with the collapse of certain credit institutions in the United States, Great Britain, and other countries. This is why we believe that any hostile financial actions toward Russia are a double-edged sword, and even the slightest error will send the boomerang back to the Aborigines." It's kind of a very interesting quote. I guess that's the way you think. That's the way the Russians see this. They really believe that that our sanctions are going to turn around and hurt us more than it hurts them.
Well, it's already hurting the Europeans. For example, let's take Germany. Germany, if you take Gazprom, which is Russia's largest natural gas producer, 25% of all the revenue Gazprom makes comes directly from Germany. So there's no secrets that Germany is the manufacturing hub of Europe. They're the engine that keeps the European economy moving forward. So if you take one of the BASF plants, BASF is the big German chemical processing plant where they make all their they process the chemicals, make the plastics, all that stuff. Their one plant in Germany consumes more electricity in 1 year than all of the country of Norway.
Wow.
One chemical plant. Let's think about this. Now, if you take the east-west, let's say in the eastern U.S., the Marcellus Shale, they're selling natural gas for less than $2 an MCF. The Germans are paying over 4 times that. So when your hub of manufacturing is paying 400% more for electricity than your competitors in the eastern U.S., your economy is going to get hurt. And that is what the German people are seeing. And we've seen why the German GDP has slipped here lately. And we see what the problems are in the euro. So yes, but it's a domino effect. It takes time to work through the process. And it started already.
I'm just wondering, Marin, as I'm listening to the various ideas that you've passed along to us today, it looks like we've got a very troubled world ahead of us, and I guess what we always have to try to do, first of all, is take care of ourselves and our families, and we have to prepare for what's coming, because it seems to me that we could have, if let's say that we lose the petrodollar ceases to exist any longer, and I think you're indicating that that's what you believe is almost an inevitability. I guess maybe the timing is the issue. Is that right?
Correct.
So then what happens to what might that mean for Americans in terms of the cost of our living, the quality of our life and so forth, and then how can we prepare ourselves for that eventuality, for the demise of the dollar and the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency based on this petrodollar military-industrial complex system that we've set up?
This is the real issue. We have a whole chapter on this in the book, and the key is that you have to take care of your own finances and protect your family by understanding what's going on here. Jay, you would not believe how much hate mail I get because of the Cold War, calling me a Russian supporter, a traitor, all these things. But what I'm trying to bring people to light are the facts of what is going on. And here's the harsh reality. The standard, when the petrodollar dies, the standard of living in America will decrease by at least 50%. The cost of living for the average American will double instantly. And if you're smart, you will protect yourself and see what is going on in this global trend, because the trend is your friend. And I'm not advocating that, I'm a big fan or a believer in what Putin's doing. What I'm stating is this is what he is doing, and this is how you can protect yourself and make sure that your family profits from. Because in every war, there is a certain percentage of the population who have protected themselves and profit from the war. Mm-hmm. That's just a fact. And that's what I'm trying to do here for the people that are listening. Now, how do you do it? Well, we all know the importance of gold. When you have a little bit of physical gold in your portfolio, that's an insurance hedge for a devaluating currency. And that's what's going to happen to the U.S. dollar when the petrodollar dies. That's just a fact. Alan Greenspan, the former former Fed head, he last week himself said gold is going to be a lot higher in the years moving forward. Okay, that's the guy who ran the Fed for 7.5 years. So
go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's in the works. So you have to protect yourself now, because it will happen. And remember, this is a war. And in the near term, yes, we are in a deflationary environment here in the near term. But when that inflation kicks in, it's going to be a boomerang. So, you have some time here. It's a war. It can take many years to play out. But the smart people will position themselves to profit from this.
Well, Marin, I guess the question, the title of our show is, do we have to have a Cold War? Clearly, as you point out, some people who see what's going on, who are have an open mind about things and aren't manipulated by the establishment, can see through what is really happening as opposed to what we're supposed to believe is happening. And some people, as you point out, profit from war. It would be much better if we could profit from just peaceful trading. I mean, this is just awful. The war is a horrible thing, but it's a condition of humankind, it seems. And so I guess the question I would like to leave you with is, do we have to have this? Is there any way of averting what's moving forward, or is it just inevitable that history moves along, cycles repeat, and this is the way things are going to be? Or is there any chance that you could be wrong about this?
Well, look, it's already happening. So I'm talking about what things are happening using facts. So I'm not about it because it's in play. When Clinton came in and took power, invaded Belgrade and the Battle of Kosovo, they didn't follow the original protocol of what NATO was all set up. If you look at the UN, the policies put in place after World War II, when you're the, absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yeah.
And the balance of power globally, America was without a doubt the global superpower. But all of their follies and failed foreign policies have now resulted in a point where the rest of the world, the emerging markets, are joining forces. Putin is the leader of that. He is the face of this new emerging superpowers. And yes, Russia is the one right now that is the focal point. But behind Russia, you have countries like China, and it's now balancing the power where America can't go and do what suits their interest at that particular moment. So the game, the foreign policy game has changed, and what America really needs is a leader who understands the global politics and understands now there's many people in America in the government who understand what I'm talking about. But the problem is the existing leadership. Obama, for example, when Mitt Romney and Obama had that debate, and when Mitt Romney said, the biggest threat to America today is Russia, he said that. Obama laughed.
Yeah.
Obama laughed on national television. He said, no, it's not. Interesting what happened a year later in Syria. Interesting what happened a year later after that in the Ukraine. Okay? The reality is that, Obama did not even recognize or respect that comment. So how is he supposed to understand what's going on? If the next leader of America, the next president of America continues that trend, it's going to the colder war is going to get worse, and it's going to happen in fast forward time. It's going to happen in an accelerated pace. However, if America elects a leader that understands this and repositions America to win the colder war, then it can change. But my question to you, Jay, is do you think that when over 50% of the population gets their paycheck from the government, they're going to elect the right guy?
No, I mean, I think, as Ian McAvity likes to point out, that America now, with the demographics moving as they are, that more people are voting for a living than working for a living. So I am not optimistic. I must say, I'm sorry to say. But, you know, we have to deal with reality, Marin, and I thank you very much for passing that reality on to us today. I think you've made it very clear, and I would like to just ask you before we conclude our discussion today, once again, tell our listeners where they can go to acquire a copy of this book, The Colder War, How the Global Energy Trade Slipped from America's Grasp, how they can pick up a copy of that book and also follow your work on an ongoing basis.
Well, the book is available both in electronic form, so places like Amazon, you can get it now delivered through your Kindle or Apple iBooks. In bookstores across North America on November 10th, so you can buy it also from, Barnes & Nobles. You can also get it delivered from the Casey Research website, and that's where my monthly publication is, and that's just caseyresearch.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Marin. It's really been a pleasure talking with you, listening to your ideas. The Colder War, it's a must-read for everyone, so I hope folks will go out and pick up a copy and follow Marin's work on an ongoing basis. Thank you very much, Marin, for being with us today.
My pleasure, Jay. Thank you.